Hello there, one and all. I hope you haven't missed us too much. So, just in case you're wondering, I won't dwell too much on this, but basically, I'm in a new office, new environment, and I'll tell you about that in another video. But Ralph, you had a very nice look at that. Very nice, very classy, very classy. Christmas present. Hello. Christmas present. Some sort of an exciting Christmas present for you.
Yeah, sorry guys. That was a trilby. A trilby
Yeah.
is a hat for those who don't know. And
Mhm.
if you're not watching me, of course you can't see that. But that's my
Yeah. Yeah.
my wife gave me a trilby as a present,
Very
and
nice.
this is like Frank Sinatra classic Rat Pack. And you can only really wear that in London and get away with it. It's for the old duffer bars, where
Nice.
hotels where you have smoking lounges and stuff. So it's
Nice.
unlikely I'm going to wear that a lot, but
Right.
anyway, there it was. And
Very
by the
nice.
way, Happy New Year to everybody, guys, and
Mm.
thanks for tuning in again.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So yes, so there we go. Ralph's got a new hat. I got a new office. And so anyway, what I thought we'd do today, as this is the first the first podcast for us of the year, is to actually talk through a few of the themes that I brought up in Watson's Yearly. Now, Watson's Yearly, for those who don't know, is part of the resources of Watson's Daily, and it's what I've been writing over the last 4 weeks. So I've written, I think it's now about 55,000 words over the last 4 weeks. And that has been comprising writing all of the Watson's monthlies, and then that has fed in to Watson's Yearly. So for those who don't know, so Watson's Yearly is available to subscribers of Watson's Daily, and it summarises what the news, all the news of last year. It also gives you a calendar for stuff that's happening this year. It also does a rundown of all the G20 countries plus a few extra. So just to give you a flavour, a sort of global flavour, and tells you when elections are, for instance, because hopefully many of you know that 2024 there's going to be something like, I think it's something like 80% of the world's population are going to be subject to basically doing elections this year. So it's going to be a massive year, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And then the last section of Watson's Yearly is talking about some of the themes of this year, which we are going to talk about now. Now, the thing is with Watson's Yearly, unlike any other yearly report I've ever seen in my life, it's going to be a live document. So a lot of yearly reports, they are useful for a few weeks at the beginning of the year and to give you a good roadmap for the rest of the year and all that sort of thing, but then everyone forgets about them. But this one I'm going to revisit, so I'm going to literally get these themes, I'm going to stick them on that wall behind the computer here, and every time there is something that comes up that is within these themes, I am going to update Watson's Yearly, so you will be able to see how things change over the year within these themes. So there you go. So so what are the themes themselves? So I've actually picked out 6. And by the way, when I first started writing Watson's Yearly many years ago, I used to use loads and loads of different sources. I used to get a lot of friends of mine from investment banks and things to send me lots of different materials of annual reports and things, from other investment banks. And I've done that over the years. I use The Economist. I've used all sorts of things. I've used Wired. I've used, what else? I've used Monocle even. I've used all sorts of different magazines. One year I used something called the Nikkei Trendy, which actually we did used to use when I was a broker to talk about the new themes of the year, and it's actually very good, but it just takes a while to translate. But anyway,
Private Eye.
yeah.
Private Eye, The Spectator.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, I've used so many sources. Anyway, as time has gone on, and as I've written so much stuff over the years, and remember last year, I wrote the equivalent of War and Peace over last year. So that's over 550,000 words, or something like that. Anyway, so I have just sat back over this Christmas period, and I've really thought about actually what are the themes, because there's loads of themes, and they're kind of boring and quite samey. And anyway, so these are the ones that I wanted to mention. So firstly, populism and democracy. These are things to look out for in 2024. Second, nearshoring. I'm going to tell you a bit more about each one as we go on. But next, number 3 is deglobalisation, or an acceleration of deglobalisation. The fourth one is renewables. Fifthly, more targeted use of AI. And fourthly, the increased importance of the Gulf states in terms of growth potential for various different industries. So with regard to populism, democracy, I touched on it before. I said that something like 80% of the world's population are going to be, subject to an election this year. Certainly in Europe, we have seen a swing to the right, and it does look like populism is rising in popularity again. And so, I mean, we saw a bit of that last year with Meloni in Italy winning the general election. After you had a real Europhile in Mario Draghi, the safe pair of hands, the one that everyone wanted, the one that was invited back by the president of Italy. He basically got shoved aside for this populist prime minister. So there's one. Then we saw at the end of last year, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands doing really well. And by the sounds of it, kind of surprised, because he then thought, oh, well, I have to rein in some stuff, because actually I might have a serious chance of getting elected properly. So I need to be more, more attractive to the voting public. So populism is rising. The second thing about theme is about nearshoring. So I think it would be fair to say the last 3 years we've seen COVID, so we've seen a global pandemic. We have seen supply chains, disrupted by war in Ukraine and now war in the Middle East, as well as other things. Because do you remember when that oil tanker was trying to do a 3-point turn in the Suez Canal and failed miserably, and that snarled up supply chains for a good few months after that. So I think nearshoring is going to be. So nearshoring is basically making stuff closer to where you want to where the customer bases are. So I think we're going to see that, because global supply chains, there's a lot of scope for more disruption of global supply chains. So that's why I think nearshoring is interesting. And that includes things like, obviously it's very good for manufacturing, but also potentially good for warehousing and things like that, because they're going to have more supplies in more different locations to make sure they don't get caught short. The third thing is more deglobalisation, kind of related to the nearshoring, but also the fact that over the years we've all become very reliant on, let's say, tech coming from Asia, sort of cheap goods manufacturing from China. I mean, there's all sorts of different stuff that we've got used to. But over the last few years, we've actually found that, in fact, there's too much. We're relying too much on in certain places for supplying all of this. So I think that there's going to be more you know, this whole the whole idea of globalization is going to change. So I think there's that. The next one, number 4, is renewables, and renewables is all about the use of again, since the Ukraine war, we have seen that more countries have suddenly thought, wow, we are so reliant on Russian gas or Russian oil or whatever. We've got to do something about this. So Germany being a particularly strong example of this. So countries have become more conscious about wanting to generate their own power. So they can do this either by building LNG terminals and things, and we've seen an uptick in exports of LNG from America in particular, as countries want to de-emphasize their reliance on, let's say, Russian gas. But also we're going to see more offshore, onshore wind, solar, as more countries invest more money in this. But also it's going to be a big, I think there's going to be a big move in nuclear as well, because if last year was all about the introduction of small modular reactors and planning and things, this year I think is going to be more about, okay, so where are we going to do it? When are we going to start? And it's going to actually start in earnest. Fifth one, more targeted AI, is all about, last year we all got to play around with AI. A lot of us, did it for the first time. Lots of fun, lots of weird things happen, lots of hallucinations. But I think that actually there's going to be it's going to be very important to make money from AI, because so much money has gone into it. And one thing is, I think, so with more targeted AI could be something like, my suggestion would be LinkedIn. So for instance, LinkedIn, I think, is the best database in the world for CVs. It is better than it is superior to other sources, like even if you are a global recruiter. The thing is with LinkedIn, it's generally more up to date. It's not always across the board, but generally it's more up to date. When people change their role, they tend to change their LinkedIn, or at least they change their LinkedIn once they've gone past their probation period. So they do that. But I think that LinkedIn will get its wish potentially. I think it's an unofficial wish, so it's my thoughts as to what it wants to be. It wants to get rid of recruiters. And it has improved tools over time so that search can be more specific. But my argument is, if you actually overlay that with more and better AI, suddenly you really are going to be able to invent a portal or provide a portal that is truly useful for companies that want to hire people. And isn't it lucky that Microsoft owns LinkedIn, and it also happens to be very well in with OpenAI, which obviously has ChatGPT. So if you put LinkedIn, ChatGPT, Microsoft all together, I think you end up with something that could be pretty powerful. The last thing is the Middle East, or the Gulf states in particular. And I feel that they provide, especially with China faltering at the moment, they provide a region where you can invest, countries can and industries can invest money without offending the Americans. And these places are very much growth. There's a lot of growth going on. They've got loads of money. They can do all this stuff. And I wonder whether this region or these certain countries are going to become like China was to the rest of the world maybe 20 years ago, when it kind of was the only place where there was truly massive growth. I mean, the days of annual GDP growth of 10, 12% or whatever, that was unheard of elsewhere. So all pretty amazing. But anyway, those are the things that we're going to talk about today. I would like very much to get Ralph's spin on all this, because he's a genius, as we all know. So anyway, so the first one, populism, democracy. Will democracy survive? We've got some pretty important elections this year, haven't we?
Yes, so on that, I mean, most of these themes are we're not going to be able to, of course, explore in the narrow confines of this particular one podcast, but we're going to revisit these over the year, I believe,
Yeah.
and maybe we're going to do specific podcasts on perhaps not each theme, but certainly the ones which are going to be more topical. This first one is clearly very much topical and is going to remain topical for most of this year and beyond. It's the theme of how populism and democracies interact, how populism is a danger to democracy, but also paradoxically how democracies enable populism. Because let's first briefly look at the evidence, and we don't have to look far, the evidence is all around us. We see, and you mentioned a few examples of that, of course. We see populism rising in Italy. That has happened. We have recently seen Geert Wilders in the Netherlands establishing his far-right party there. We have seen Brexit. That's not exactly the same, but it is, of course, something which has been the consequence of a very focused campaign, partially fueled by disinformation. And it is interesting to note Brexit in the list of this because it is the result of a referendum. And I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Just a few more examples, things which have not yet happened. We are looking at Germany. We see, and this is troubling, the inexorable rise of a far-right nationalist party in Germany. And I can just bring myself to not say again, whoops, I've said it. I mean, it's basically impossible to think of the AfD without invoking some sort of historical context. And finally, and most topically for this year, it's of course Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump is a fascist, and I'm not saying that to smear him or to be polemical, because it is there's a long list of criteria and political philosophy of how fascism is defined, but one most important one is that a fascist demands loyalty to the person and not to the office. So it would be akin to our king demanding loyalty to him as a person rather than to the office of the crown. And this is clearly what President Donald Trump has done when he was in office, and I believe that is what he's going to do again if he comes into a second term of office. Now, talking about this a little bit more general, and then we move on to the next theme because, of course, we haven't got infinite time this episode. There is a strange and paradoxical link between democracies and populism. Populism always rises when people have reason to believe that they are hard done by. Maybe household incomes aren't high. Maybe the economy isn't doing very well. Maybe there is a loss of identity as a population. And does all of this ring true? Yes, it does, because that is exactly the times in which we live. We have high inflation, high interest rates. We all know what that means. We've discussed it lots of times, but we wouldn't have needed to discuss it. We all know this. Mortgage costs are massive, electricity costs are high. And at the same time, we have a lot of immigrants coming into all of our societies, not just the UK, also Germany, the Netherlands, and everywhere. And this is leading to a loss of identity of the people who lived in this country sort of originally. I'm making this sound a little bit more naive and simplistic than it actually really is. But the situation is that it is, I believe, a legitimate demand of a society to maintain a self-identity. This in itself is not a right-wing statement, and one needs to acknowledge that this is a legitimate demand. Once this sense of self-identity is perceived to get diluted, then you open the door to the arguments of populists who use that anger, that dissatisfaction in society to push their own agenda. And that has happened in the Netherlands and in all of these other countries which are mentioned. And we will need to explore in perhaps the podcast which we're doing on this, to which extent democracies can defend themselves against subversion from within. Because that is the danger here. Subversion from within. People who rise through democracies and then systematically dismantle checks and balances in the democratic governments. Trump has tried to do that. We have historical examples where dictators rose from democracies and through the systematic dismantling of the checks and balances of the institutions of these democracies have established themselves as a dictator, and that is the issue. The issue is there. All of our societies, I think, facing these with some level of severity this year. And not just this year, sorry, in this day and age, let's say. And we will need to explore to which extent democracies can safeguard against subversion from the sin. And this is now where I also stop on this, but just wanted to bring my earlier comment back where I said that Brexit is important in this list because it was a referendum. My view would be that one of the arsenal of in the arsenal of democracies to safeguard against that would be to disallow the referendums. My provocative statement on which I want to end this particular snippet on this is democracies work well. They are the only way in which modern societies can organize themselves, but they need to be managed, just like everything else needs to be managed. And my cynical and this is not cynical, but it is provocative. I do realize this. I would say as a guiding mantra, it would have to be as much demos as necessary, as little as possible. That is why referendums are out, and we need a representational democracies, I would say, with proportional representation.
Okay.
That's just a starter for 10. There will be more to follow on this, I'm sure.
Brilliant. Very good. Okay, so the next theme is about nearshoring. And obviously, we've seen this whole thing over the last few years. Sorry. We've seen the thing over the last few years where supply chains have broken down. And I think that, we are going to need to see the production coming back home, I think. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, the problem with that is absolutely true. I mean, if you think about globalization, what you're basically saying is that you offshore your manufacturing bases to another country, and maybe you will be able to benefit from lower labor costs in this country. This has traditionally been the reason for that. But if you do that, you, by the way, being companies, of course, specific agents in the economy. So if one does that, then you still have a trade-off. You have a trade-off between the political stability of the country into which you offshore the manufacturing base and the economic benefit which you are hoping to harvest from that. If the political risk, meaning the risk of perhaps governments being overthrown or governments becoming less stable in that country of destiny where you put your target country, if the political risk in these countries rises, then it may no longer be advisable for you to offshore your manufacturing base into that. So as a simple equation, you might say the more political risk, the less globalization, or the more political risk, the less is globalization a no-brainer, a feasible module in your corporate strategy. And so if we now look at the political risk, again, unfortunately, we don't have to look very far. We only have to look to Russia to understand that there is certainly at least one country which has dropped out of the canon of countries which you can legitimately identify as those where you can offshore your manufacturing base.
Mm.
And I don't think I'm going to say anything anything controversial if I say that Russia has become, for the next decades, I believe, a pariah and a menace to the world, but certainly to Europe. I do not believe it is difficult or controversial to state that the European NATO members have to prepare for the potential risk of a war with Russia. Because if what we're seeing at the moment is the destabilization of the situation on one of the eastern borders of the European countries with Ukraine, but linking back to Trump, if Trump comes in for a second term of office and commensurately pushes the agenda America First, which basically is isolationism, defunding the support to the Ukraine, then Russia may well extend their influence in Ukraine, indeed even win that war. Looking 10 years ahead, I don't find it difficult to envisage a situation where he might want to test Article 5 of NATO by invading one or indeed all of the Baltic states. So I think it is reasonable to expect Russia to remain a country of very high political risk, indeed a menace where you can't offshore your manufacturing base into Russia. China is a difficult situation. We will have to see whether such a political development will embolden China to invade Taiwan. And such a geopolitical move, of course, would commensurately lead to China becoming a higher political risk as well, which is actually jumping to another one of your themes, which is almost by a process of elimination, the Middle East remains one of the last vestiges of potential growth to invest in. So coming back to home, literally now, means that, yes, I believe countries will look at stabilizing their manufacturing base onshore, and to the extent that they are part of a economic bloc, onshore means that economic bloc. So the UK will have to do it in the UK, and European countries in the single market will need to do it in the single European market.
Yep, absolutely. So I mean, then this then takes us on to the next theme, which is more deglobalisation, which is kind of related. But the whole thing is that you want to make sure that it's all related to the supply chains, taking into account the increased amount of geopolitical risk that we're seeing at the moment. There's the shifting sands of the power that various countries and regions have had and are moving towards at the moment. And that is meaning also that we can't rely on any one area. So therefore, we need to sort of spread the sort of manufacturing capabilities. But yes, I mean, what do you think about that?
No, indeed. I mean, I think I just in my commentary already linked up the two the dynamics, onshoring and deglobalization. They are sort of part of the same theme.
Yeah.
If I wanted to focus more on deglobalization specifically, I'd say that in the absence of as much possibility to use the world as a global manufacturing base, countries perhaps may see the need to forge links between themselves in a way of like the single market or other economic customs unions,
Mm.
because that's second best. If I can't invest all over the world, invest meaning put my manufacturing bases in other countries all over the world, then one consequence is that I have to do it actually in my home market, but my home market may be actually very small. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're the UK, for example, you're mid-sized, well, not mid-sized economy, you're one of the global leading economies, but it's a mid-sized market of 60 to 70 million people. And so there will be a limit to what you can get from that market. There will be saturation point, which you reach more quickly than if you are operating in a bigger market. Now, the UK has decided to leave that bigger market, but there is no reason why the UK and other countries of in that bracket would not actually see the need to perhaps forge closer economic ties in terms of customs unions, which do not go as far perhaps as a political union, which the single market is trying to be. So maybe we see as a consequence of the fact that you cannot actually, of deglobalization, not so much necessarily just onshoring, but maybe that is a driver for local, by which I now mean sort of local regions, for regional consolidation of countries in some form of economic of customs unions, this sort of thing, economic clubs, customs unions.
Fair enough. Okay.
And of course, I mean, if we get a Labour government, back to the theme of election this year, if we see a Labour government, they may well be on their agenda. It may well be to push the UK back into a customs union of some nature with Europe, if this can be done. So that might be one political manifestation of the trend I just outlined.
Interesting. That's cool. Okay. So the next one is renewables. Loads of debate on renewables last year, and I mean, for instance, there was loads of problems. Remember, there was Ørsted, and there was other ones. There's various anyway. Basically, lots of projects around the world, renewables projects, particularly wind farms and things, which said, look, they either pulled out of major projects, or they just came back and they said, listen, to the governments and said, listen, we're going to need more state support. Otherwise, the costs have risen. So there's a lot that we saw a lot of stuff last year. We saw the whole, Jeremy Hunt with the onshore wind farms, planning permission, that sort of thing. But this year, I think that more countries are going to continue to want to have to be energy independent. But yes, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, this also goes back to some of the trends. I mean, increasing geopolitical risk, and now we're back in Russia, means that we can't rely on Russian energy. Germany can't rely on Russian energy, and we see the issues which are arising in Germany because of that playing again into the hands of populism, by the way. So these things are all interconnected and related, of course. So we cannot afford to be dependable on some other countries as providers of energy, electricity, etc. And that sort of goes back to onshoring. So we need to sort of onshore the production capacities for energy. But what might they be? Yes, they can only be renewables or nuclear energy. And renewables are a tricky issue. When you look at this in more detail, I haven't got the numbers at my fingertips now, but I will have if we actually do a specific podcast on this theme. Renewables are more tricky than meets the eye. If you, for example, look at a wind farm, well, first of all, a wind farm needs to be somewhere. This is the basis of this all onshore-offshore debate with Jeremy Hunt. Where shall we build the wind farm? Shall we do it in the Irish Sea? Yeah, that's going to be cool because then they're not on somebody's land. You know, as soon as you build a wind farm on somebody's land, that particular person is going to be NIMBYist on you and is going to say, yeah, very good idea, but not here, mate. And there
Yeah,
is,
love it.
yeah,
Just go down the road a little
yeah,
bit more.
exactly. Love
Yeah.
it. It's in my neighbor's
Yeah.
garden, you know.
Yeah.
And there is some level of, I mean, look, I mean, we all human beings. I wouldn't necessarily like a wind farm to be built into the Thames over here. And so you can understand this, but there is another issue here. The wind farms are not cheap to build, and the concrete which are used into the building of one particular farm actually produce a lot of CO2 in the manufacturing of them. So while it is true to say that that particular renewable energy is CO2 neutral in the production of the electricity, it is not true to say that it is CO2 neutral in the construction of the actual of the actual farm. And the same goes for solar energy. With solar energy, you have the issue that these solar panels, they degrade over time. And at the end of a period of 10 years, you have to actually recycle them in some way. This is not the same issue as nuclear waste, but it is an issue which is reminiscent of nuclear waste. The solar energy is also not as easy. The other thing about solar energy is sometimes you get these ideas that, oh, well, cool, let's just have half of Morocco covered in a solar energy farm. That'll do, won't it? It will actually do in terms of a very theoretical calculation of the power output, but it won't do because there's a very interesting, pragmatic, real-world issue. These wind farms would be so large that you need to transport the electricity which is being produced in the middle of them to the fringes of the actual wind farm, because you can export them, and that makes the cost of that actually economically non-viable again. So I'm going to stop waffling about this now, but I'm just wanting to indicate that there are issues with the non-renewable energies which are real, but which do not meet the eye. And which are not necessarily CO2 neutral, which leads me or urges me to say that a indispensable part of an independent energy policy has to be nuclear energy. And I believe that is going to be the trend over the next 10 years, to have a resurgence of nuclear energy in forms of more modern, economically viable technologies, micronuclears, what are they called?
Small modular reactors.
Yeah,
SMRs.
etc. All these things, that is going to be, I believe, the focus of the next 10, 20 years.
Actually, along with that, though, I do think that electricity storage, that's going to be something that is very urgent, because it's all very well. I mean, it's difficult enough generating electricity in the first place, but actually hanging on to it is even more difficult, it seems. And actually, if you can have, let's say, an exponential increase in the efficiency of storage, electricity storage, that means that you don't have to have as many wind farms, because actually you can hang on to what you've got, you even out the provision, and it means that you don't maybe have to have quite so many small modular reactors. So, I mean, because that's the other thing. If there is a lot of more geopolitical instability, you would have thought, well, SMRs are going to be massive targets, aren't they? Surely, which is not going to be, something that I don't think many people are particularly talking about. But these are things that I think everyone has to think about.
Yeah, on that, you mean chucking a bomb on a nuclear?
Yeah, on an SMR, yeah.
Yeah, yes, but then if you're willing to do this as a combatant aggressor, then you might as well chuck a nuclear bomb at something, because nuclear bombs are a lot more devastating than chucking something on a nuclear on a nuclear plant. Also, most of them have a containment. The containment is a half sphere, and most of the bombs deflect from it.
Oh, right.
This is deliberate. It's deliberately done to actually minimize that risk. But nevertheless, you are right.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
there is a risk.
Okay. So keeping it light, more targeted AI. So I mean, obviously, I talked about this. About potentially sort of Microsoft, OpenAI, and LinkedIn working together. I mean, that's just one example, but I do think that companies are going to want to see more and earn more from AI, and I think that's an interesting theme, not just for this year, but for years to come. Although I think it really is there's going to be a real impetus this year. But what do you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think AI is moving. Maybe not next. I don't know when. No, maybe not this year, but certainly within the next sort of 5 years. I think AI is moving into the stage where it is becoming investable. And by investable, I mean that it is a targeted, a single-purpose AI, which is housed in a corporate envelope into which you can invest. And this may be as wide as OpenAI. Well, we can't invest in OpenAI. It's not quoted on the stock market, but of course Microsoft and others can. But I think I think AI is going to move into the field where it is becoming investable, and that's going to be like more oxygen to the fire, which is AI. And I'm meaning this in a positive sense. AI has so far been single purpose AI, and I think it's going to remain that. I mean, the holy grail, which people keep talking about, of AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, I believe that is still further away than many science fiction aficionados may want it to be. And much of the popular debate, which is focusing on AGI, I think is probably more sensationalist than real. The real developments are going to be in the commercialization of AI and the applications which we are already seeing. One of a nice example which we have talked about, and you're going to it's an upcoming podcast which we have talked about already, which will be published soon, I believe, is the AI which Hiscox Insurance has developed with who was it? I can't remember. Good Lord! I mean, it was. Thank you, Google. Google Cloud. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And we were going. That's a very interesting. That's a very interesting special or specific purpose AI. It is sort of investable because you can invest in Hiscox, and it's that sort of commercialization which I see a lot more coming in the next few years, starting with this one.
Brilliant. I'm going to try to upload that before this, because I think that makes more sense to have that as episode 845, and then but anyway, it will be up there.
So if you upload it before it, then I will say we have done a podcast on this.
Yeah, well,
guys.
we did. I mean, this is the thing. We did do, but it's just I've shut myself down over the Christmas period.
Yeah, it was a very good Christmas period for everybody.
Yeah. Well, absolutely, very quiet one. Anyway,
that was your Christmas present for everybody.
Yeah. It's Christmas present.
Shutting up for a month.
Yes, exactly. Well, there we go. See, I'm a giver. So I'm all about the giving. So okay. So the last thing is about Middle East, Gulf states, etc. Or more particularly Gulf states. Last year, we've seen a lot of movement within, say, Saudi Arabia, for instance, where we've seen them. So Saudi Arabia's done this, Qatar has done this as well, and they're setting up all these, funds, or they're investing loads of funds into things like sports, tourism, that sort of stuff, in order to try to. I mean, certainly Saudi Arabia's case, they've got this, I think it's Horizon 2030 or whatever, this plan to try to wean themselves off oil revenues. And I think this is a theme that's going to continue and ramp up in the bid to try to broaden their revenue streams and ultimately make more money and not have to rely on oil. But and the other thing at the same time is they've got a lot of money, they've got a lot of growth going on now, they've got a lot of growth potential. It kind of reminds me a bit of China maybe 20 years ago, where it was one of those places where countries might hesitate initially to invest in because of the political risk, and there's an opaque nature of the economy for many, especially in social media, for instance, where there's a lot of censorship. But companies and industries just threw money at it anyway because it was the only massive growth story in town, and by town I mean the world. And I kind of mean, maybe this time is the same going to be happening with, say, the Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar, places like that, because they're the ones that have the money that can pay for the growth. So I wonder whether we're going to see more and more investment there. I mean, actually, last year, for instance, I think lots of lawyers and things were moving over to. I think they were going to Riyadh. I think it was, opening offices there, because unlike most of the rest of the world, there's still M&A going on over there. So obviously, if you're a lawyer, for instance, you go where the work is. But anyway, what do you think about that?
Well, on that one, I'm less clear than you are. I mean, there's definitely an opportunity there, but I don't quite know where the growth is. I mean, to me, if you look at all the Middle Eastern economies, most of them are sort of not very diversified. I would almost say single-purpose economies. That's no longer true as much as it used to be true 50 years ago. But most of them are, of course, based on the extraction and export of resources, mostly oil, but also gas to some extent. And it's places like Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest, certainly the biggest Middle Eastern oil manufacturer in the world, and I think the second largest the biggest in the Middle East, and I believe the second largest in the world. Well, they know themselves that the source of their wealth is finite, because non-renewable energies are going to run out at some point. And they know themselves that they have to actually rebase their economies on a more diversified dynamic structure, and that is of course what they're trying to do. So to the extent that they will be able to do that, to the extent that other economies can be domiciled there which do have growth potential, I would agree with you. At the moment, if I use an analogy, which may only make sense to me because I've been an analyst for so long, at the moment these economies look to me as if they are companies, similar to companies which with limited growth potential but huge cash generation potential. So these generate cash like nothing else, and if there were a company, they would pay dividends. But they don't really pay dividends, do they? They just have the cash they generated in their economy, and then they buy lots of assets in other countries. Now that in itself is not something which is interesting to an investor. So they would need to be able to truly use the cash generation which they have in order to domicile new genuine growth industries in their economies, and at the same time in their countries, and at the same time I believe also liberalize their societies and inject more notes of democracy into their societies. Now, this is a bit subtle because China has not done that. So they've basically just chucked the communism out of the window and replaced it with capitalism in the economy, but they have not replaced communism and totalitarianism in their political governance. And it worked for them brilliantly. So while it is not true to say that it is therefore indispensable for lasting economic growth to be supported by democracies, there are studies which have clearly shown that when you open a society towards democracy, then this is again like oxygen to a fire. So I would say these are things which I would watch closely in the Middle East before I would identify the Middle East necessarily as a object of foreign investment. At the very least, I would constrain the circle of countries which would be legitimate targets of investment, perhaps to the Gulf states, because we can see at the moment, with the cauldron of violence which the Middle East has become, how the competing interests which are based on ideology and religion effectively raise the political risk to a level where it must be very difficult for investors to actually look at the Middle East at the moment and say this is something where we can safely invest, which goes back to the very first theme which we explored, or the second theme which we explored in terms of globalization, which is clearly political risk militates against globalization. And so to the extent that you still have political risk in the Middle East, which I think is going to be a staple diet for the next decades to come, any legitimate investment, I believe, needs to be focused on perhaps the Gulf states there, and then to the extent that they can actually change the dynamics of their economy from a one-purpose economy to one which is more diversified.
Fair enough. There we go. Well, thank you very much indeed. I mean, very interesting discussion. I mean, there's so much to talk about. I did find, writing all this stuff over the holiday period was really interesting. I mean, it's a good job it's a good job I love this stuff. But there's so much going on now. There really is so much going on now. There's so much potential change. So, we're going to do our best to try to keep you informed about those changes in our various podcasts. So, yeah, I mean, I just thank you very much, Ralph, as always, for being a complete and utter legend. You were worried about what I was going to say then, weren't you?
Yeah, I was actually.
A complete and utter ... legend in your case. So
I was already doing the thumbs up, and then I thought, I'm not sure about this.
Yeah, good. But anyway, look, thanks so much. Always brilliant. We will be back again very soon.
We'll be back.
Yeah.
I love waiting for years to say that. Fantastic. Thanks, guys, for listening. Brilliant.
Bye.
Cheers.